Molly, you naughty dog. Molly, come here.
Hedgehogs are mysterious little animals, surrounded by legends and superstitions. The closer one gets to them, the more mysterious they seem. Some of the stories come from the distant past, but the best known of them all is only 90 years old, Beatrix Potter's Mrs. Tigglewinkle. She's a lovable old character, if a little eccentric. Modern research shows that real hedgehogs are just as eccentric, and also that some of the legends may have a firm basis in fact. Hedgehogs drowse the winter away in some sheltered spot, bundled in leaves and grass. The warmer weather of late March or early April brings them out in search of food, their first real meal for 4 or 5 months. As soon as the primroses are on parade in the woods, the hedgehog wakes up, using the very last of its stored body fat in the search for a long-delayed breakfast. Hedgehogs are omnivorous. They will eat anything. The food they find most often in the leaf litter is large insects, worms, and slugs. They don't have to choose their food very carefully because they're immune to most poisons, including those used for protection by insects such as oil beetles and some moths. One animal that even hedgehogs won't eat is the toad. The warts and bumps on a toad's back produce an irritating fluid which makes even a hungry predator drop it immediately. The effect on the hedgehog is to make it wipe its tongue on its spines, perhaps to try to get rid of the taste. Sometimes it salivates so much that its spines get covered in froth. The reason for much of the mystery attached to hedgehogs is that they're nocturnal. Although they're really quite common in Britain, to see one by day is unusual. To film them, the camera team has to use an image intensifier, originally developed by the Army for use as a night sight. The image intensifier produces a luminous green picture which, although it's not perfect, makes it possible to see what's going on in lighting conditions where an ordinary camera would be blind. A distant grunting and snuffling indicates that there are hedgehogs about, although they're invisible in the fading twilight. Through the intensifier, the team filmed the courtship of a pair of wild hedgehogs. The first on the scene was a female in breeding condition. Before long, she was joined by a male. A second male wandered by, but he didn't stop. Sometimes 2 or 3 other males compete for the female's favors. The original couple were already involved in the courtship ritual. The female hedgehog plays hard to get, keeping her head turned towards the male as he circles her. She snorts and snaps at him from time to time in threat. Hedgehogs are solitary animals, and breaking down the female's reserve will take time. The whole courtship can last for 6 hours or more. Eventually, the couple wander off together into the night. Mating is very rarely seen. Compared with the public and noisy courtship, it is a secretive affair. The male plays no further part in the rearing of his family. The female builds a nest and rears the young single-handed. A hedgehog's nest is a surprisingly compact structure made of grass or leaves neatly arranged in layers. It's not woven like a bird's nest, but the female lines up the grass blades by turning round and round inside, combing them into place with her prickles. Between mating and the birth of the young is 5 or 6 weeks, and during this time the female has to keep well fed to nourish her growing babies. This is when hedgehogs become really useful to the gardener. Just as the vegetable garden comes under attack from slugs and snails, the hedgehogs move in and keep their number down. As well as slugs and snails, hedgehogs are known to eat carrion and even lizards and mice when they can catch them. But on a warm spring night, the first choice from the well-stocked larder is a cool, chewy snail. Gardeners appreciate hedgehogs, but farmers have no reason to be fond of them. For over 400 years, there was a price on the hedgehog's head. Old church account books often include sums paid out for dead hedgehogs. The reason was partly superstition, but partly the hedgehog's guilt, based on good evidence. The fact is, hedgehogs love eggs, though they find them hard to open. The habit of stealing hens' eggs may be restricted to certain rogue individuals, but no ground-nesting bird is safe when there's a hedgehog about. A colony of black-headed gulls shows every sign of nerves as a hedgehog comes bumbling through the grass. An unguarded nest seems like an open invitation, with an anxious parent ready to fly. But the hedgehog has other ideas. Sea urchins get their name from the hedgehog. The old Norman word for a hedgehog was hérisson, which became hérisson in French, but urchin in English. At sunset, hedgehogs are surprisingly common on beaches, becoming seaside urchins in their own right. After nosing around among the debris from the last high tide, looking for scraps, this urchin seems to remember the birds nesting on the shore. A ringed plover tries to draw the hedgehog's attention away from its eggs, but the hedgehog is not to be distracted. Compared with hen's eggs, plovers' eggs are easy to break. One poison hedgehogs are not immune to is adder venom, though they have a slightly higher resistance to it than other small animals. Most hedgehogs that get bitten will die, but they're well protected from a bite by their barrier of spines. The snake strikes in self-defense, but ineffectively. The spines are modified hairs, hardened at the tip into thorny points. They're barely an inch long, but with 90 to the square inch, they form excellent protection. The snake strikes and fails again. There are records of hedgehogs killing and eating adders, protected by their spines. But spines are no protection against the hedgehog's greatest enemy in modern times, the roads at night. A hedgehog doesn't run for cover. Under serious threat, it raises its spines and stands still. On the roaring, flashing road, it simply carries on its way, oblivious, all too often with fatal results. Escape is a matter of chance, and it looks as though the hedgehog's luck is running out in Britain. A lot of people hardly ever see a live hedgehog, but dead ones are all too common through the summer on our increasingly busy roads. Males in search of a mate are the most common victims, but females and young suffer too as they travel in search of food. Gardens are a favorite foraging place, but to get from one to another, they have to cross too many roads. Most town gardens are too well kept for hedgehogs to nest in, so the female seeks out some secluded patch of cover, perhaps in a park or beside a golf course. There, the young hedgehogs are born in June. When they're born, their spines are fine and covered with a thin layer of skin. After 3 days, coarser white prickles are pushing through. The darker spines grow later. They don't open their eyes for at least 2 weeks. Safe in their dark nest, they have no need to see. Their first spines are getting thicker, and already they're very sharp. There are usually 4 in a litter, though some families have been known as large as 7. The babies make a continuous piping sound, like a nestful of young birds. Their mother comes and goes boldly, without seeming to conceal the position of her nest. Hedgehogs can afford to be bold. Apart from the occasional fox or badger, they have no natural enemies. The young hedgehogs are suckled for about 3 weeks, until their eyes have opened and they have grown their full adult set of spines. The 5th baby in this litter was born dead, but its body is still in the nest. Hedgehogs aren't particularly hygienic. The mother shows a passing interest, but she has other, more pressing business with the living. While the youngsters are in the nest, they acquire their lifelong passengers. Hedgehogs are commonly covered in fleas and ticks. The fleas climb about among the spines and the coarse belly hairs, feeding at will. Among them are a few ticks, also bloodsuckers. It's not true that hedgehogs can't groom themselves like other mammals. They can perfectly well, but they don't do it very often. Both babies and adults lick each other's spines, but it's thought not to be connected with grooming. They produce large quantities of saliva, which contains a scent which is believed to identify individuals to each other. Even the young roll and wriggle as they anoint themselves. This suggests an answer to one of the oldest mysteries about hedgehogs, the apple-carrying story. Self-anointing seems to be a response to a strong taste or smell, like the defensive chemicals of the toad. For centuries, people have described hedgehogs rolling about on windfall apples, spiking them on their spines, and carrying them off to eat. This drawing was made by a monk in Rochester Priory in the 14th century. Could it be that the taste or smell of rotting apples triggers self-anointing so that the apples get rolled on by accident and impaled on the spines? There's one way to find out. A hedgehog among windfall apples showed no sign of excitement. But can it carry one on its back? Suppose one had fallen from the tree and landed on it. A small, soft specimen seemed suitable. It sticks, but there's no real suggestion of how it might have got there. Like the monks of Rochester, we will have to assume that people have seen hedgehogs rolling on apples. They certainly like to eat them, and we have seen that they can carry at least one. But they've never been known to store food in their nests or anywhere else. If this hedgehog was trying to take an apple away to eat, he failed. Back at the nest, under the roots of a tree, the young hedgehogs are growing quickly on their rich milk diet. After only 3 weeks of life, they've already seen something of the outside world, following their mother on her feeding excursions. One fateful night, all that comes to an end. They've been accustomed to feeding from their mother on demand during their nighttime trips, but one night she refuses, rolling from side to side to present a barrage of spines to each hungry little nose. Now the dark woodland is the youngsters' only home, full of curious smells and strange noises. But, being hedgehogs, they have nothing to fear. After the first few guided tours, the mother hedgehog provides no further training for her offspring. If she meets one of them in the night, she treats it as a stranger. The young are left alone to discover the ups and downs of life. They know instinctively that the answer to most of life's problems is to roll up. Their spines will protect them against injury if they fall, as well as against most of the prowlers and predators in the dark wood. A young hedgehog's fact-finding tours can get him into some odd positions. Hedgehogs are natural climbers, possessed of a strong urge to explore. They can eat practically anything, so food might be anywhere and take any form, from a moth to a black slug. Although he's never seen water before, this young hedgehog finds out about it very quickly, and about one of its inhabitants. As the young hedgehog builds up his experience of the world, the season moves on, and his body, by now fully grown, begins to undergo a change. Scientists are still trying to understand what happens when animals hibernate, and the hedgehog is one of their favorite experimental subjects. The days get shorter and cooler, and both changes affect the hedgehog in the same way, to slow it down. Before it slows down too much, it builds a winter nest in a safe and secluded place. At the edge of a wood or under a bramble bush, the hedgehog gathers together a ball of leaves and grass. Before it dozes off, it's well insulated against the coming winter. At the Cambridge School of Veterinary Medicine, a scientist finds that the hedgehog's bodily functions have slowed to less than half their normal rate. Electrodes touching its skin measure the dormant animal's heartbeat to compare it with one still awake and active, the bottom pulse on the screen. While it's still active, the hedgehog feeds busily, building up a store of fat to live on during the winter. Its pulse at this time is about 120 beats per minute. By the time it's curled up in its nest, its pulse is down to 55 a minute, or even less, and everything else has slowed down to conserve the energy stored in its layer of fat. Through the worst that winter can bring, the hedgehog sleeps secure. If there's a very warm spell, it might emerge for a snack before going back to bed. But through the cold weather, it stays asleep, snugly tucked up beneath the bramble bush. The scientists would like to know how it's done. Induced hibernation could be medically useful to some humans. But so far, the hedgehog has kept its secret, along with other mysteries about its peculiar way of life. Sometimes an enterprising fox digs out a hedgehog in winter, but even to a fox they're very hard to find, and a good proportion survive to greet a new world after the thaw. Immune to poisons and armored against all but the most determined enemies, sleeping through the worst of the year and able to eat anything that's going, the hedgehog seems to have a lot in its favor. It's sad to reflect that the survival of Mrs. Tigglewinkle's descendants depends on their luck in the lottery of the roads.